What if good and evil are not truths, but inventions? What if the moral compass you've trusted your entire life, the voice that tells you right from wrong, isn't eternal, universal, or divinely ordained, but a story crafted and reshaped by human hands? This is Nietzsche's radical claim. Morality is not universal. It is created. And the fact that this statement feels shocking, even blasphemous, tells us how deeply morality is woven into the fabric of our existence. From childhood, we are told that morality is sacred. Parents, teachers, priests, politicians all speak as if good and evil are permanent categories carved into the very structure of reality. To question them feels dangerous. To deny them feels unthinkable. And yet Nietzsche did both, unapologetically. He believed morality is not truth, but interpretation. Not eternal law, but human invention. And once you understand this, the ground beneath your feet begins to shift. Because if morality is a creation, then it can be questioned. If it can be questioned, then it can be dismantled. And if it can be dismantled, what then remains to guide us? Nietzsche begins by asking a simple but devastating question. Where did our ideas of good and evil come from? Most people assume morality came from God, handed down as commandments, binding for all time. Others believe morality emerged from reason, a natural discovery of universal rules to live by. But Nietzsche dismissed both claims. For him, morality wasn't discovered like gravity or gifted like scripture. It was constructed. And it was constructed for a reason: to serve human needs, human instincts, and, most importantly, human power. Think about it. What we call good has not always meant kindness, humility, or selflessness. In ancient societies, good meant noble, powerful, life-affirming. To be good was to be strong, beautiful, and dominant. The aristocracies, the warriors, the rulers, they decided what counted as good, and they defined themselves as the measure. Their morality was a celebration of vitality, not restraint. Their values came not from meekness, but from confidence and pride. But over time, the powerless, the oppressed, the enslaved, the weak, fought back in a way that didn't require swords or armies. They fought back with words, with values, with morality itself. They inverted the meaning of good. What had once been called noble and strong was rebranded as cruel and evil. And what had once been dismissed as weakness, humility, obedience, self-denial, was elevated as virtue. Nietzsche called this the slave revolt in morality, a revolution not of weapons, but of definitions. This inversion is at the heart of Nietzsche's critique. Morality, he argued, is not the voice of eternal truth, but the residue of historical battles between the strong and the weak. Each moral system is less about what is universally right, and more about what benefits a particular group at a particular time. Morality, in other words, is a tool, a mask for instinct, for resentment, for will to power. If this sounds abstract, consider how morality functions today. Governments tell us it is good to be loyal, to obey the law, to sacrifice individuality for the greater good. Religions tell us it is good to be humble, to renounce pleasure, to live for another world instead of this one. Corporations tell us it is good to work hard, to consume endlessly, to define our worth by productivity. Each system frames its interests as moral truths, disguising self-preservation as righteousness. Nietzsche's point is that morality is never neutral. It always serves someone's purpose. And here lies the uncomfortable truth. If morality is invented, then its authority is fragile. Strip away the stories, and you find nothing absolute behind them. There is no cosmic good, no eternal evil. Only shifting human perspectives, shaped by culture, history, and psychology. And yet, most people live as if morality were as real as gravity. We punish those who question it. We shame those who live outside it. We cling to it because the alternative, a world without moral certainty, terrifies us. But Nietzsche would argue that clinging to illusions is worse than facing the abyss. To live authentically, we must first see morality for what it is, not a discovery, but a creation. Only then can we move beyond good and evil and begin the dangerous, liberating work of creating values for ourselves. So the question is not whether morality exists. It clearly does. As a system, as a tradition, as a story. The question is whether morality is true. And if it is not, then what guides you? If good and evil are human inventions, are you ready to invent your own? Or will you continue living by rules written for someone else's benefit, mistaking them for eternal truth? Where do our ideas of right and wrong come from? We are taught to believe they come from above, written into the universe by God, by reason, or by some eternal order that lies beyond us. But what if morality did not descend from the heavens? What if it rose up from the dirt, from blood and survival, from the instincts of human beings fighting for power? Nietzsche's challenge is as simple as it is devastating. Morality is not divine. It is not eternal. It is not discovered like gravity or mathematics. Morality is invented, born out of human needs, human fears, and human struggles for dominance. And once you see this, the sacred aura around good and evil begins to fade. Let's step back for a moment. In the ancient world, before Christianity, before the dominance of religious morality, good did not mean what it means today. It did not mean humble, selfless, or compassionate. For the early aristocratic societies of Greece and Rome, good meant noble, powerful, life-affirming. It meant beauty, strength, courage. To be good was to embody vitality, to stand above the crowd, to radiate excellence. Evil, in contrast, was not cruelty or sin. It was weakness, poverty, vulgarity. Those who lacked strength, who lacked refinement, were considered bad, not because they hurt others, but because they simply didn't measure up to the noble ideal. This is where Nietzsche begins, with the shocking realization that morality has a history. What we call virtue today once had a completely different meaning. The words themselves carried the imprint of class struggle, of aristocrats defining themselves as the measure of all value. Morality, in this sense, was originally a celebration of power, not its restraint. But power never remains unchallenged. The oppressed, the weak, the enslaved, those who lived under the shadow of aristocratic pride, did not remain silent. They too create, values, but values of a very different kind. They could not compete with strength, so they sanctified weakness. They could not celebrate pride, so they elevated humility. They could not match power, so they branded power as evil. This was the beginning of a revolution, not fought with weapons, but with words. Nietzsche called it the slave revolt in morality, the moment when the definitions of good and evil were turned upside down. Think about that inversion. What had once been considered noble, strength, ambition, dominance, became condemned as sinful, cruel, prideful. And what had once been despised, meekness, submission, obedience, became elevated as virtue. Christianity, Nietzsche argued, was the ultimate expression of this inversion. It redefined morality in the image of the weak, glorifying suffering, pity, and self-denial, while condemning the natural expressions of vitality and power. This history matters because it reveals that morality is not eternal, but contingent. It shifts depending on who is defining it and why. Morality is not truth. It is strategy. The aristocrats used morality to affirm their power. The weak used morality to protect themselves and undermine the strong. In both cases, morality served human interests, not divine law. And when you bring this idea into today's world, its force becomes even clearer. Think about politics. Every side claims to hold the moral high ground. But whose morality are we talking about? Is it the morality of freedom or the morality of security? The morality of tradition or the morality of progress? Each faction defines good in a way that benefits its vision of the world, just as the aristocrats and the oppressed once did. Or look at culture wars. One group calls it evil to disrupt tradition. Another calls it good to break free from it. Morality becomes a weapon, a rhetorical battlefield. Not because one side has truth and the other does not, but because morality itself is always born from conflict. Nietzsche's point is not that morality is meaningless. Quite the opposite. Morality is powerful, precisely because it is created. It shapes societies, determines destinies, commands loyalty. But its power comes not from heaven, but from us, from our instincts, our resentments, our will to power. And that realization strips morality of its innocence. So here's the uncomfortable question. If morality is not eternal, but historical, if it was born out of survival, resentment, and power, what does that say about the values we live by today? Are our ideals of compassion, humility, and equality timeless truths? Or are they just the latest stage of a long battle, another strategy of the weak to keep the strong in check? And if that is the case, then who really benefits from the morality you obey? What if weakness disguised itself as virtue? What if what we call goodness today is not the mark of moral superiority, but the triumph of resentment? This is the unsettling claim Nietzsche makes in his concept of the slave revolt in morality, a revolution not fought with weapons or armies, but with values and definitions. It is one of Nietzsche's most controversial insights, because it flips our understanding of morality upside down. The virtues we cherish, humility, compassion, equality, Nietzsche argued, did not emerge from strength, but from weakness. They were not born from the noble, but from the resentful. Let's trace the logic. In the ancient world, the aristocrats, the warriors, the rulers defined what was good. To them, good meant noble, powerful, proud. It meant a life that overflowed with vitality, that created, conquered, and celebrated its own excellence. The bad, by contrast, were the weak, the poor, the vulgar, those who simply did not measure up. Badness was not about sin or cruelty. It was about inferiority. But the weak were not content to be labeled as inferior forever. They lacked the strength to overthrow the aristocrats directly, But they discovered another path to victory: redefine the terms of morality itself. If they could not beat the strong in battle, they would defeat them in meaning. And so, the slave revolt in morality was born. Here is how it worked. The weak began to brand the qualities of the strong, pride, power, ambition, as evil. What was once celebrated as noble became condemned as cruel, and the qualities of weakness, humility, obedience, submission, were recast as virtues. The tables turned. The strong, once admired, were painted as wicked oppressors, while the weak, once despised, were exalted as righteous. For Nietzsche, this was not progress, it was inversion, a reversal born not of truth, but of resentment. Il est ressentiment, a festering envy of the powerful, disguised as moral condemnation. Instead of admitting weakness, the oppressed cloaked their inability to dominate in the language of moral superiority. And Christianity, Nietzsche argued, was the greatest triumph of this slave morality. Its entire value system elevates the meek, the poor, the suffering. Blessed are the meek, it proclaims. Turn the other cheek. Renounce pride. Condemn the will to power. In this worldview, life is not to be celebrated, but denied. Strength is not to be embraced, but restrained. Vitality is not to be honored, but suppressed. The weak, through Christianity, managed to brand their very condition, powerlessness, as holiness. Think about the brilliance of this move. By redefining morality, the powerless gained the upper hand. They didn't need swords to bring down their oppressors. They needed guilt. They didn't need armies. They needed conscience. Suddenly, the powerful could no longer revel in their dominance without shame. Pride became sin. Desire became temptation. Victory became arrogance. The strong began to doubt themselves, while the weak claimed the moral high ground. This, Nietzsche believed, was the true revolution of Western history. Not a political revolution, but a spiritual one. And it reshaped the moral fabric of entire civilizations. Now ask yourself, has this really disappeared? Or is it still alive today? Look at the way we use morality in politics, in culture, even in social media. We rarely celebrate raw strength. Instead, we condemn it as oppressive, arrogant, unjust. We elevate the language of victimhood, framing the powerless as morally superior. Entire movements are built on the idea that suffering itself grants authority. Is this justice? Or is it the same inversion Nietzsche saw 2,000 years ago, playing out on new stages? Nietzsche's warning was clear. Slave morality does not lead to liberation. It leads to stagnation. By condemning strength, creativity, and ambition as evil, societies risk suffocating the very forces that drive growth and vitality. And yet, the revolt was so successful that most of us cannot even imagine morality without it. We instinctively see compassion as good, pride as bad, humility as noble. We no longer question it, which is precisely why Nietzsche forces us to. So here's the uncomfortable truth. The morality you take for granted, the morality you were raised to believe is eternal and unquestionable, may not be a universal law at all. It may be the product of resentment, a clever inversion that turned weakness into virtue and or into sin. The question is, what happens if we strip away this mask? What if we dared to imagine morality not as the triumph of the weak, but as the affirmation of life itself? Would we see virtue differently? Would we call strength creativity, ambition, good again? Or are we too deeply entangled in the slave revolt to ever return to that vision? What if morality is nothing more than a set of blinders, narrowing your vision of the world? What if the words good and evil are not truths carved into reality, but prison bars built to keep you obedient? Nietzsche's book Beyond Good and Evil delivers this provocation. He argued that morality is not absolute, not eternal, not universal. There is no cosmic scoreboard keeping track of sins and virtues. There are only perspectives, shaped by history, culture, and above all, the human will to power. What we call good and evil are not truths. They are interpretations. And Nietzsche wanted us to break free from these simplistic categories, to see life without the distorting lens of inherited morality. To understand this, we need to step back. For centuries, Western thought divided the world into moral opposites: light versus dark, virtue versus sin, heaven versus hell. This black and white thinking shaped our laws, our religions, our politics, even our personal choices. Morality promised certainty in a chaotic world. It told us who was righteous, who was wicked, what should be pursued, and what should be condemned. But Nietzsche believed this certainty was an illusion. The world, he argued, is not made of absolutes. It is made of perspectives, shifting, conflicting, endlessly diverse. Think of morality as a story, passed down from generation to generation. Each age rewrites it, shaping its heroes and villains according to its needs. The Greeks called strength and beauty good. Christianity exalted humility and suffering. The Enlightenment raised reason and equality as ideals. And today, we glorify authenticity, self-expression, and tolerance. Which of these is the eternal truth? None of them. Each morality reflects the interests of its time. Each serves not reality, but power. This is why Nietzsche insists we must go beyond good and evil. As long as we cling to absolute categories, we remain trapped. We think we are moral, when in reality we are obedient. We think we are virtuous, when in reality we are conforming. Nietzsche's point is not to abandon values, but to recognize that values are created, and if they are created, then they can be recreated. The true task of humanity is not to obey moral laws, but to become value creators. Consider how this plays out in the modern world. Politics thrives on dividing humanity into good guys and bad guys. Entire nations are demonized while others are painted as saviors. But whose perspective defines this? The same is true in culture wars. One side condemns tradition as oppressive. Another condemns progress as destructive. Both sides believe they fight for truth. Both sides believe they are good and the other is evil. But Nietzsche would say they are trapped in the same prison, the prison of simplistic categories. Or, look at our personal lives. We judge ourselves harshly when we break the rules we've been taught. We label ourselves sinners, failures, disappointments. But whose rules are we breaking? Rules written by whom and for what purpose? Nietzsche challenges us to ask, are you living by values you created or values handed to you by a society that wants your obedience? This is where Nietzsche's thought becomes dangerous and liberating. If there is no eternal good or evil, then the responsibility of meaning falls squarely on us. We cannot hide behind commandments, traditions, or moral absolutes. We cannot excuse ourselves by saying, I was just following the rules. To live authentically is to confront the chaos of life directly and carve your own path through it. It is to replace obedience with creation, conformity with self-overcoming. But here lies the terrifying consequence. Without absolutes, there is no safety net. No guarantee that your values are right in any universal sense. No assurance that your path is blessed by God or sanctioned by reason. Nietzsche believed this risk was the price of freedom. To live beyond good and evil is to accept the weight of responsibility, to write your own script rather than reciting one written for you. So, are you ready to live beyond good and evil? Are you ready to question not just society's morality, but your own? Or will you remain within the comforting prison of absolutes, mistaking obedience for truth and conformity for virtue? Have you ever wondered why we call some things evil while praising others as good? Is it really because we've uncovered some eternal truth about the universe? Or is it because morality is just a mask, a disguise for fear, envy, and weakness? Nietzsche believed that beneath every moral judgment lies something hidden, something less noble than we'd like to admit. When people declare something evil, it is rarely because they've discovered cosmic wickedness. More often, it is because they fear it. When they praise something as good, it is not always because it is objectively virtuous, but because it serves their needs, their instincts, their survival. Morality, in Nietzsche's eyes, is psychology, and psychology, when stripped bare, is driven by instincts, by resentments, and by power. Think about it. Why do we call pride a sin, but humility a virtue? Is it because humility is inherently good? Or is it because the powerless benefit when the powerful restrain themselves? Why do we condemn greed but praise sacrifice? Is it because selflessness is objectively better? Or is it because those who have less want, those who have more to feel guilty for enjoying it? Nietzsche's point is not that sacrifice or humility are worthless, but that we rarely examine the motives behind why they became moral ideals in the first place. For Nietzsche, morality is full of these hidden motives. The weak call the strong evil, not because strength is inherently wicked, but because they envy and resent it. The poor condemn wealth, not because money is demonic, but because wealth exposes their own lack. Even kindness can be suspect. Is it truly selfless, or is it a subtle way of exerting influence, of gaining admiration, of disguising weakness as virtue? Nietzsche's genius was psychological. He ripped away the polished mask of morality and revealed the raw instincts underneath. He saw envy where others saw justice, resentment where others saw righteousness, and self-interest where others saw selflessness. In his eyes, morality was less about truth and more about camouflage. And if you think this is only about ancient philosophy, look around you. Modern life is saturated with this psychology of morality. On social media, people condemn others not always because they are outraged, but because outrage brings attention, status, and moral superiority. Entire political movements brand their enemies as evil, not to uncover truth, but to strengthen their own cause. Even in our personal lives, we use morality as a weapon. How often do people say, "That's wrong," when what they really mean is, "That threatens me"? Nietzsche's insight forces us to ask, when we make moral judgments, whose interests are we really serving? Are we defending truth, or are we defending ourselves? Are we protecting eternal values, Or are we protecting our egos, our weaknesses, our fears? This is why Nietzsche warned against taking morality at face value. Every moral statement, he believed, should be followed by the question, what does this serve? If someone praises humility, ask who benefits from your humility. If someone condemns power, ask who fears your strength. If someone demands sacrifice, ask who gains from your suffering. Morality, when examined honestly, often reveals less about eternal truth and more about human psychology, a tangled web of fear, resentment, and desire. But here's where things get uncomfortable. If Nietzsche is right, then even your own values may not be as pure as you believe. That principle you cling to, that moral line you refuse to cross. Is it truth, or is it instinct, dressed in holy robes? Do you value honesty because it is eternal, or because dishonesty threatens you? Do you praise kindness because it is universal, or because you fear cruelty in others? Nietzsche would argue that much of what you believe about morality is not chosen freely. It is inherited, shaped by the needs of others, and reinforced by centuries of conditioning. So where does that leave us? If morality is a mask, then the terrifying task is to remove it, to ask yourself not just what you believe, but why you believe it, to admit that your sense of right and wrong may be nothing more than a reflection of hidden instincts, instincts you would rather not see. And if morality is disguise, then the challenge is to strip it away, to face human nature without illusions, and to decide whether you will keep living behind the mask or dare to live without it. So ask yourself, when you say, that is good, or that is evil, are you speaking from truth? Or are you just whispering the language of fear and resentment that has been passed down for centuries? And if you removed the mask of morality, what would you see staring back at you? Whose morality are you living by? Yours or someone else's? When you feel guilt, when you feel shame, when you feel the sting of doing something wrong, are you listening to the voice of truth or the echo of power whispering through you? Nietzsche believed that morality is not what it pretends to be. It does not descend from heaven, and it does not rise from pure reason. Morality, he argued, is a tool wielded by those who seek control, a system not designed to liberate, but to restrain, a cage that disguises itself as a compass. Look closely at how moral codes work. They tell you how to live, what to desire, what to avoid, and what to fear. They do not just punish actions. They shape thought itself. Morality does not only demand obedience, it produces it. And the genius of morality, as Nietzsche saw it, is that you enforce it against yourself. You don't need chains when guilt will do the job. You don't need guards when shame builds the walls. Throughout history, morality has been the favored weapon of those in power. Governments, religions, and cultures have all used it to shape human behavior. To rulers, morality justifies authority. To priests, morality sanctifies obedience. To cultures, morality reinforces tradition. What is framed as eternal truth is, in reality, a set of rules designed to keep societies orderly and to keep individuals in their place. Take religion, for example. Christianity's moral code does not simply tell people to live well. It tells them to submit, to obey, to sacrifice this life for another. Pride becomes sin, desire becomes temptation, rebellion becomes damnation. And who benefits from this? The institution that defines the rules, the church that claims to hold the keys to salvation. Morality here is not about truth. It is about maintaining power. Or look at politics. Leaders declare what is patriotic and what is treasonous. They define loyalty as good, dissent as evil. But loyalty to what? To truth? Or to the state itself? Morality in this sense does not serve justice. It serves authority. It trains citizens to police themselves, to fear questioning, to label independence as danger. Even in culture, morality operates as control. Societies tell us what is proper, what is acceptable, what is shameful. Women are told what is modest. Men are told what is honorable. Children are told what is respectful. These codes are rarely universal. They change from place to place, century to century. But their function remains the same: to shape people into predictable forms, to maintain stability, to protect the interests of those who hold power. Nietzsche's claim cuts deep. Morality does not serve truth itself. It serves those in charge. It is a mask that hides its true purpose. When morality tells you that ambition is arrogance, ask who benefits from your restraint. When morality tells you that obedience is virtue, ask who benefits from your submission. When morality tells you that sacrifice is holy, ask who gains from your suffering. And this isn't just history. It's happening now. Think of how morality is used in modern debates. Corporations preach about ethical responsibility, but often only to shield themselves from criticism. Governments frame wars as moral necessities, not as contests for resources or dominance. On social media, outrage is framed as righteousness, but often it is just another way to gain status, to control the narrative. Everywhere you look, morality is the language of power dressed up as universal truth. But here's the uncomfortable twist. Morality works best when we believe in it. The strongest chains are invisible. You follow the rules not because someone forces you, but because you've internalized them. You feel guilt, not because you've betrayed reality, but because you've betrayed the story you were taught to believe. That is the brilliance and the danger of morality as control. So what happens if we see through it? What happens if we admit that morality may not be eternal law, but a strategy, a weapon, a system of control? The ground begins to shake, because without moral absolutes, you are left alone with your instincts, your desires, your will to create. That freedom is terrifying, but it is also the first step toward liberation. So I ask you, the next time you feel the sting of guilt, will you assume you've violated truth? Or will you ask yourself a harder question? Whose morality have I just obeyed? And whose power have I just served? What happens when the foundation of morality crumbles? What happens when the authority that gave meaning to right and wrong, good and evil, no longer exists? Nietzsche captured this moment with a phrase that still shocks the world today. God is dead. But what he meant was not that a divine being had literally perished, but that belief in God, the cultural, moral, and spiritual foundation of Western civilization, was collapsing. The certainty that once held societies together was dissolving, and with it, the very structure of morality itself. For centuries, morality was anchored in God. The 10 Commandments, eternal laws, divine justice, these gave people the sense that their actions mattered in an ultimate sense. Murder was not only a crime against society, it was a sin against heaven. Kindness was not only practical, it was sacred. But Nietzsche argued that modern science, rationalism, and skepticism had eroded this foundation. Humanity had killed God not with weapons, but with doubt. And now, the terrifying consequence stood before us: nihilism. Nihilism is the condition of a world without absolutes. If there is no God, then there is no ultimate standard of right and wrong, no cosmic meaning, no eternal purpose. Life becomes unmoored, like a ship cut from its anchor, drifting into chaos. Nietzsche saw this not as a distant possibility, but as the defining crisis of modernity. The very morality that had shaped entire civilizations was losing its credibility. And once people stopped believing in divine authority, what would stop the descent into despair, into meaninglessness? Think about what this really means. Without God, why be moral? Without eternal consequences, why not cheat, lie, exploit? If morality is not grounded in heaven, then is it anything more than a human invention, fragile, temporary, and unstable? Nietzsche feared that once this realization spread, people would collapse into apathy. If nothing matters, then why strive? Why create? Why live? But Nietzsche was not simply mourning this collapse. He saw it as both a catastrophe and an opportunity. The death of God destroyed the old foundation, but it also opened a door. If morality was no longer handed down from above, then perhaps it could be created from within. If values were not eternal truths, then perhaps humanity could become the creator of values. For Nietzsche, the death of God was not the end, but the beginning of a new challenge: to overcome nihilism, to confront the void without retreating into illusions, and to build meaning in a godless world. And yet, look at our time. The shadow of nihilism is everywhere. In politics, people argue over values, but cannot agree on foundations. In psychology, many wrestle with anxiety and depression that stem not from physical needs, but from a lack of meaning. In culture, entertainment often reflects emptiness, worlds of irony, absurdity, and despair. The old faiths no longer command universal obedience, but nothing strong has replaced them. We live, as Nietzsche predicted, in an age of transition, suspended between belief and disbelief, between inherited morality and the possibility of new creation. But here's where Nietzsche remains, both inspiring and unsettling. He did not think humanity could simply invent shallow substitutes for God. Consumerism, nationalism, even blind faith in science, these were, in his eyes, inadequate replacements. They were still evasions, still attempts to cling to external authority. What he demanded was something far more radical: that we confront the abyss directly, that we acknowledge the death of God without fear, and that we take upon ourselves the terrifying task of creating meaning where none is given. This is why Nietzsche introduced the idea of the Übermensch, the overman, the one who creates values instead of inheriting them. Only by becoming creators could we rise above nihilism. Only by embracing the chaos could we build new order. The death of God was not simply a tragedy. It was the test that would determine whether humanity would shrink into despair or rise into greatness. So here is the challenge Nietzsche leaves us with. In a world without absolutes, in a world where God is dead, what values will you live by? Will you cling to old illusions, pretending they still hold power? Will you collapse into nihilism, paralyzed by the thought that nothing matters? Or will you take the harder path, the path of creation, the path of responsibility, the path of becoming who you truly are? Because if morality no longer descends from heaven, then it must rise from you. And that is both the greatest danger and the greatest possibility of the human condition. What if morality is not one thing, but two? What if the values you hold dear, the ones you've been taught to see as universal truths, are really the product of a struggle between two opposing systems of thought? Nietzsche believed that morality does not come in a single package. He argued that there are two fundamentally different kinds of morality: master morality and slave morality. two opposing lenses through which human beings define what is good and what is evil. And the tension between them, Nietzsche claimed, still shapes our world today. Let's begin with master morality. This is the morality of the strong, the noble, the self-confident. For the masters, the aristocrats, warriors, creators, good was whatever expressed strength, pride, and vitality. To be good was to be powerful, beautiful, creative, and full of life. Bad was not evil, it was simply weakness, vulgarity, mediocrity. The masters did not live by resentment. They affirmed themselves. They celebrated their strength openly. They did not need permission to create values because they were the source of values. Now contrast this with slave morality. This is the morality of the weak, the oppressed, the powerless. For them, the world of the strong was terrifying, threatening, unjust. They could not fight strength with strength, so they redefined the terms. What the strong called noble, the weak began to call evil. Pride became sin, ambition became arrogance, power became cruelty, and what was once despised, humility, obedience, patience, became virtues. Slave morality flipped the script. Instead of celebrating life-affirming strength, it sanctified weakness and condemned vitality. Here lies Nietzsche's great insight. Morality is not absolute. It is perspective. Masters define good one way. Slaves define it another. What you consider virtue depends on which side of power you stand. And if you did, Nietzsche did not hide his preference. He admired the creativity, vitality, and life affirmation of master morality. He feared the resentment and stagnation of slave morality. But he also acknowledged that both systems coexist, that human civilization is built on their constant tension. The masters create values, the slaves reinterpret them. The masters celebrate life, the slaves restrain it. And together, they shape the moral fabric we still live in. Think about modern society. We are told that humility is good, that self-denial is noble, that equality is the highest virtue. These are the legacies of slave morality. But at the same time, we glorify billionaires, athletes, innovators, and leaders who embody strength, pride, and ambition, the traits of master morality. We live in a strange mixture of both systems, pulled between admiration for the strong and sympathy for the weak. Nietzsche's question was simple but unsettling. Which morality do you live by? Do you celebrate strength even when it intimidates? Do you embrace ambition even when it risks arrogance? Or do you condemn power, hiding resentment beneath the mask of virtue? Nietzsche believed most modern people, influenced by Christianity and democracy, live under slave morality without even realizing it. They speak of equality and compassion, not because these are eternal truths, but because these values protect the weak from the strong. But what if that protection comes at a cost? What if glorifying humility suppresses creativity? What if condemning ambition stifles greatness? What if society's insistence on equality prevents the exceptional from rising above the mediocre? Nietzsche's critique is dangerous, precisely because it forces us to ask these questions most would rather avoid. So here is the provocation. Morality is not one universal code, but a battlefield between two competing visions. What happens when the old gods are gone, when the commandments lose their power, when the foundations of morality crumble beneath our feet? Do we collapse into despair, or do we dare to create something new? Nietzsche believed that this was humanity's greatest challenge and greatest opportunity. If morality is not eternal, if good and evil are not carved into the fabric of the universe, then the responsibility for meaning falls on us. Not priests, not kings, not philosophers of the past. Us. The terrifying truth of Nietzsche's philosophy is that the death of God is not just the end of old values. It is the demand for new ones. And only those willing to shoulder that burden can rise beyond nihilism. For Nietzsche, this was the task of the Übermensch, the overman, the one who dares to create values rather than inherit them. The Übermensch is not a tyrant, not a dictator, not some comic book hero of brute strength. He is a creator, a visionary, someone who says yes to life even when it is harsh, even when it is chaotic, even when it offers no eternal guarantees. Where others cling to borrowed commandments, the Übermensch forges his own. Where others obey, he invents. Where others seek safety, he embraces risk. This is why Nietzsche's call is so bold, so unsettling. He is not asking us to return to old illusions. He is not asking us to substitute one external authority for another. He is demanding that we take responsibility for our own existence, that we stop living as slaves to values we did not choose. Think about how most of us live. We follow moral rules passed down by parents, by religions, by traditions, by culture. We rarely ask where these rules came from, who they serve, or whether they align with our deepest instincts. We obey because it is easier. We inherit because it feels safer. But Nietzsche would say, safety is the language of stagnation, inheritant. And yet, it is also the only way forward. Without new value creation, humanity risks falling into nihilism, the despair of meaninglessness. But with it, there is the possibility of transformation, of a higher form of existence. The Übermensch is not just one person. It is a symbol of what humanity could become if it dares to live beyond obedience. So here is the question Nietzsche forces upon us. Will you keep living by values handed to you by others, pretending they are eternal truths? Will you cling to safety, to inheritance, to the comfort of external commandments? Or will you risk the terrifying freedom of creation? Will you take responsibility for meaning itself and dare to become the author of your own morality? Because in the end, Nietzsche's challenge is not about philosophy. It is about you. What if everything you were taught about good and evil was a lie? What if morality itself, the rules you follow, the values you defend, the guilt you carry, is not eternal law, but a human invention, fragile and ever-changing? This is Nietzsche's most unsettling truth. Morality is not timeless. It is not written into the cosmos. It is human-made, born in history, shaped by power, molded by need, and like everything human, it can be unmade, remade, or destroyed. For centuries, we've been told that morality is sacred, that it stands above us, commanding obedience. But Nietzsche pulls the mask away. He shows us that morality is not a divine order but a human construction, always shifting, always fragile, always vulnerable to collapse. Think about the history we've traced. Once, good meant noble, strong, and proud. Later, it meant humble, meek, and obedient. Once, morality exalted strength. Later, it condemned it. Once, morality came from gods. Later, it came from reason, then from politics, now from culture wars and social movements. Each age insists its morality is universal, yet each morality passes, leaving another in its place. If morality were eternal, why would it change so drastically? If morality were absolute, how could it contradict itself from one century to the next? Nietzsche forces us to face a reality most would rather ignore. Morality is not truth. It is power. It is psychology. It is survival. And it is always temporary. But this realization leads to the most terrifying question of all. If there is no universal good or evil, how should we live? If there is no eternal commandment, no divine law, no cosmic justice, then what anchors us? What prevents us from drifting into chaos, into nihilism, into despair? Here Nietzsche offers both a warning and a challenge. The warning is that many will collapse under this realization. They will cling desperately. This is not a slogan of self-help. It is not about comfort. It is a demand for radical authenticity. To become who you are is to confront the abyss without fear, to admit that no one will save you, to accept that your values must come from you. It is to shoulder the terrifying freedom of existence and to shape it with your own hands. And yet this is what makes Nietzsche both dangerous and liberating. Dangerous because he tears away the comforts of universal morality, leaving us exposed. Liberating because he invites us to rise above obedience, to stop living as echoes of others, and to live as creators. Look at the modern world and you'll see the struggle Nietzsche predicted. Old moralities are breaking down. Religion no longer commands universal belief. Politics is fractured by competing visions of justice. Psychology tells us morality is relative. Culture insists morality is constructed. and yet people still cling to absolutes because the alternative feels unbearable. Nietzsche saw this crisis coming. He warned that humanity must either collapse into nihilism or rise into something greater. So here is the uncomfortable truth. Morality is not eternal. It is human-made, fragile, always shifting. That is terrifying. But it is also an opportunity, because if morality is made, then you can make it. If values are created, then you can create them. If there is no universal good or evil, then you are free to define what your life will stand for. The only question is whether you are willing to face that freedom. Will you continue to live by borrowed commandments, mistaking them for eternal truths? Or will you dare to live without illusions, to create meaning where none is given, to become who you are?